David rubbed his eyes and looked at the data screen again. The numbers hadn't changed. 3 dragon representatives sat across from him in the small consultation room, their scales reflecting the harsh sunlight that poured through the window. Outside, heat waves shimmered across the desert landscape of Pyros 7, where the temperature hadn't dropped below 140 degrees in recorded history. "You want snow," David said slowly, making sure he understood correctly. The youngest dragon, who had introduced himself as Prince Syrax, nodded. His copper-colored scales clinked softly as he moved. "Yes, frozen water falling from the sky. We have seen it in the old data archives." David set down his tablet. He worked for the Galactic Terraforming Consortium as an atmospheric engineer, which meant people asked him to do difficult things every day. But this was different. This was impossible. "Your Highness, I need to be honest with you. Snow requires temperatures at or below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That's freezing point for water." David gestured toward the window. "It's 160 degrees outside right now. Your people are silicon-based life forms. You need extreme heat to survive. Any environment cold enough to produce snow would kill you in minutes." Syrax's golden eyes didn't blink. "We know this. We have consulted with 17 different species. All of them have told us the same thing you just said." One of the older dragons, her dark red scales marked with age, spoke up. "We are not fools, Engineer David. We understand basic physics. But we hope perhaps you might see something others missed." David felt a twinge of curiosity despite himself. "Why snow? Why is this so important?" Syrax reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small crystalline pendant. He pressed a claw against it, and a hologram flickered to life. A larger dragon appeared in the air between them, her scales a brilliant gold that seemed to glow from within. "My mother," Syrax said quietly. "She died 6 months ago. When I was young, she found an ancient human data archive in a crashed survey ship. Most of it was corrupted, but there was one video file that survived. It showed snow falling on Earth. She watched it thousands of times. She said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen." The hologram showed the golden dragon turning her head, her expression peaceful. Syrax's voice grew softer. "Before she died, she made me promise something. She said I should try to see snow for myself at least once. She knew it was impossible, but she asked anyway. My mother rarely asked for anything." David looked at the 3 dragons sitting in his office. They had probably traveled across multiple star systems to get here. They had faced rejection from the best scientific minds in the galaxy. And still they kept trying. "I'm sorry for your loss," David said, and he meant it. "But I have to be realistic with you. The thermodynamic barriers alone make this nearly impossible. Even if I could somehow create localized cooling, which would require enormous energy, your biology couldn't survive exposure to those temperatures." Syrax nodded slowly and rose to his feet. The other 2 dragons followed his lead. "We understand. Thank you for your time, Engineer David. We apologize for wasting it." They turned toward the door. David watched them go, these massive creatures moving with surprising grace despite their size. Syrax paused at the doorway and looked back. "My mother used to say that humans were special because they saw problems differently than other species. She said you found solutions in places no one else thought to look." He touched the pendant again, and the hologram disappeared. "I suppose she was wrong about that." The door closed behind them. David sat alone in his office, staring at the empty chairs. Through the window, he could see the dragons walking across the landing pad toward their ship. Syrax moved slower than the others, his head bowed. David pulled up his computer system and started running calculations. He didn't know why. Professional curiosity, maybe. Or maybe it was the way Syrax had looked when talking about his mother. David's own father had passed away 2 years ago, and he remembered making promises at that bedside, too. The equations on a screen all pointed to the same conclusion everyone else had reached. Impossible. Can't be done. Laws of physics say no. But David kept thinking about what Syrax's mother had said. Humans see problems differently. They find solutions in unexpected places. That he pulled up the atmospheric composition data for Pyros 7, then the geological surveys, then the magnetic field readings. His fingers moved across the keyboard, opening file after file. The sun set outside his window, and the temperature dropped to a pleasant 130 degrees. David barely noticed. What if he was asking the wrong question? Everyone had told the dragons they couldn't bring snow to them because of temperature requirements. But what if the question wasn't about creating real snow at all? What if it was about creating the experience of snow? David sat up straighter. His mind started racing through possibilities, most of them crazy, all of them technically violations of standard engineering practice. But there was something there, a tiny spark of an idea that refused to go away. He looked out the window at the dragon ship sitting on a landing pad. They hadn't left yet, probably waiting for clearance, or maybe just resting before the long journey to wherever they would go next. David grabbed his comm device and opened a channel to the landing control tower. "This is Engineer David Chun. Can you delay departure clearance for the Dragon vessel? I need to speak with Prince Syrax again." "Is there a problem, Engineer?" David smiled for the first time in hours. "No problem. I just need to ask him if he's willing to try something completely insane." 2 days without sleep was catching up to David, but his brain refused to shut down. His quarters looked like a disaster zone. Projection screens covered every wall, each one displaying different atmospheric models, chemical formulas, and energy calculations. Empty food containers sat stacked in the corner. His colleagues had stopped asking if he was okay. "He's lost it," David had overheard someone say in the cafeteria that morning. "Trying to make snow on Pyros 7. Might as well try to freeze the sun." Maybe they were right. Maybe he had lost it. But Syrax had agreed to wait, and that meant David had a chance. He just needed to stop thinking like everyone else. The problem was simple. Real snow needed cold temperatures. Dragons needed hot temperatures. These two facts could not coexist. Every scientist in the galaxy had stopped at this point and declared the task impossible. David paced around his room, stepping over discarded notes. The key was in the question itself. Syrax's mother hadn't seen real snow. She had seen a video of snow. She had experienced the idea of it, the beauty of it. What she had wanted for her son wasn't the physical reality of frozen water. It was the wonder of watching something delicate and beautiful drift through the air. "I don't need actual snow," David muttered to himself. "I need the appearance of snow, the experience." He pulled up data on Pyros 7's unique characteristics. The planet had an unusually strong magnetic field, the result of its massive iron core. It also had constant volcanic activity that kept the surface temperature so high. Both of these features had made it difficult to terraform, which was why the consortium had assigned David here in the first place. But what if those same features could be used differently? David started sketching on his tablet. If he couldn't make the environment cold, he could create localized atmospheric manipulation, a bubble of different conditions suspended within the heat. But how to create something that looked and moved like snow without it melting instantly? He spent the next 6 hours researching endothermic reactions. These were chemical processes that absorbed heat from their surroundings. If he could suspend the right chemicals in an aerosol form and release them into the air, they might create crystals that could survive briefly in the extreme heat. His first test failed spectacularly. The chemicals he mixed created a cloud of vapor that disappeared in seconds, leaving behind a smell like burning plastic. David opened all his windows and hoped nobody reported him to environmental safety. The second test produced small crystals that formed and immediately fell to the ground, shattering. They lasted maybe 3 seconds total. "Come on," David growled at his equipment. "Work with me here." The third test was worse. The crystals formed beautifully, drifting through the air like he had imagined. Then they exploded. Just small pops, nothing dangerous, but definitely not the peaceful snowfall he was going for. David sat on his floor, surrounded by failed experiments, and tried not to feel defeated. He was missing something, some element that would stabilize the crystals and let them float without falling or exploding. His comm device buzzed. A message from Syrax. "Engineer David, my advisors are pressuring me to depart. They say you're wasting time on fantasy. I have bought you 3 more days. Please do not feel obligated to continue if this is truly impossible. You have been kinder than most." 3 days. David looked around at his chaotic workspace. He had been so focused on chemistry that he had forgotten about biology. Dragons. Silicon-based life forms. Their scales contained unique crystalline structures that could withstand incredible temperature fluctuations. What if those same properties could help stabilize his artificial snow? David pulled up everything he could find about dragon biology. The scales weren't just armor. They were complex matrices of silicon compounds that regulated heat distribution across the dragon's body. The molecular structure was unlike anything found in nature on Earth. He needed samples. Real dragon scales to study. 20 minutes later, David stood outside the dragon's ship, feeling slightly insane. The heat from the landing pad made sweat pour down his face. A dragon guard, her purple scales gleaming, looked down at him with obvious confusion. "I need to speak with Prince Syrax," David said. "It's urgent." Syrax appeared within minutes. He had a duck to fit through the ship's doorway. "Engineer David? What's wrong?" "I need some of your scales," David blurted out. "Not many. Just whatever you naturally shed. I think I found the missing piece." Syrax tilted his head. "You want my shed scales?" "Yes. The molecular structure might be exactly what I need to stabilize the crystals. See, I've been trying to create something that can survive in this heat, and your scales are literally designed to handle extreme temperatures. So if I can extract the key compounds and incorporate them into my aerosol mixture." David realized he was babbling and forced himself to stop. "Sorry, I haven't slept much." For the first time since they had met, Syrax's expression changed. His golden eyes brightened, and his scales seemed to ripple with color. "You are actually trying to solve this?" "Of course I am. I said I would." "Yes, but I thought—" Syrax paused. "Everyone else gave up before they started. You're still working." David shrugged. "I made a promise to try, so I'm trying." Syrax disappeared into his ship and returned carrying a large container filled with shed scales. They gleamed like metallic copper in the harsh sunlight. "Take all of these. We shed constantly. There is no shortage." David accepted the container, nearly dropping it because of the unexpected weight. "Thank you. This might not work, but it will work," Syrax said firmly. "I believe it will work, because you're approaching this like my mother said humans do. You have not accepted impossible as an answer." Back in his lab, David carefully extracted compounds from the dragon scales. The molecular analysis took hours, but when he saw the results, he actually laughed out loud. Perfect. It was absolutely perfect that he mixed a new batch of his aerosol solution, this time incorporating the dragon scale compounds. He loaded it into his dispersion chamber and held his breath. The crystals formed slowly, growing from tiny specks into delicate, branching structures. They drifted through the superheated air in his testing chamber, catching the light and throwing off rainbows. They didn't melt. They didn't explode. They just floated beautiful and impossible in air hot enough to boil water. David watched them dance for a full minute before they finally dissolved. 1 minute. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He grabbed his comm device and sent a message to Syrax. "Cancel your departure. I need to build something much bigger." The Dragon Council chamber was carved directly into the side of a volcano. Heat rolled off the stone walls in waves that would have killed an unprotected human. David stood in his environmental suit, sweating despite the cooling systems, while 7 elder dragons stared down at him from their raised platforms. "You propose to create false snow," the eldest dragon said. Her name was Karava, and her black scales were threaded with veins of silver that marked her as nearly 1,000 years old. "Explain why we should waste resources on an imitation." David had prepared for this. He activated his hollow projector and displayed his test results. The tiny crystals dancing through superheated air appeared in the space between him and the council. "With respect, Elder Karava, I'm not creating false snow. I'm creating a different kind of snow, one that belongs to this world." He expanded the image, showing the molecular structure. Snow on Earth falls because of specific temperature and atmospheric conditions. But those same physics don't work here. So I'm using different physics. The result is something that looks and moves like snow, but it's built for Pyro's 7, not Earth. Another council member, his deep red scales marked with burned scars, leaned forward. "You used Prince Syrax's shed scales in this creation. Is this meant to be some kind of tribute?" Actually, that was practical necessity, David admitted. Dragon scale compounds are the only thing I've found that can maintain crystalline structure at these temperatures. But yes, there's something fitting about that. This snow will be made partly from the dragons themselves. Syrax spoke from his position below the council platform. Honored elders, I believe Engineer David is offering us something my mother would have appreciated. Not a copy of Earth's snow, but something unique to us. The council members exchanged glances. Finally, Karava nodded slowly. You may proceed. We will provide whatever resources you require. But understand this, human. If you fail, you will have raised hopes that should have remained buried. That is a cruelty we will not forgive. I understand, David said. I won't fail. 3 days later, construction began on the largest project David had ever attempted. The apparatus needed to be massive to create enough crystals for a real snowfall effect. Dragon metallurgists worked alongside human engineers, combining their different approaches to extreme environment construction. The thermal gradient generator took shape on a flat plateau outside the dragon capital city. It looked like a huge circular platform, 3 kilometers across, covered in intricate networks of pipes and conductors. Below the surface, dragon workers carved channels directly into the volcanic rock, creating pathways for magma to flow through heat exchangers. You want to pull power from the planet's core itself? Asked Denna, the lead dragon metallurgist. Her green scales were scorched, almost black from years of working near lava flows. The energy requirements are enormous, David explained, pointing to his calculations. I need to create and maintain thousands of crystals simultaneously. Regular power sources won't cut it. But this planet has unlimited thermal energy. We just need to tap it properly. Dennis studied the designs with obvious appreciation. Human engineering is strange. You work around your weaknesses instead of through your strengths. Dragons would simply try to overpower the problem. Can't overpower physics, David said. But you can get creative with it. The aerosol dispersal system came next. Dragon workers welded together massive tanks that would hold the chemical mixture, each one treated with dragon scale coating to prevent the extreme heat from degrading the contents. The dispersal nozzles were positioned on tall towers around the plateau's edge, designed to spray the aerosol into the air where the magnetic field manipulators would take over. That was the part David was most worried about. He was borrowing equipment meant for terraforming work, repurposing magnetic field generators to create localized atmospheric control. On paper, the math worked. In practice, he was attempting something nobody had tried before. What if the fields interact badly with our bioelectric signatures? Syrax asked, watching workers install the massive field generators. I tested that, David assured him. The frequencies are completely different. You shouldn't even notice them. You hope we won't notice them. I'm 90% sure you won't notice them. Syrax made a rumbling sound that David had learned was dragon laughter. Human confidence is very specific. The work continued for weeks. Dragons and humans developed a rhythm of collaboration, each species learning from the other. David discovered that dragon engineering wasn't just about brute force. They had an intuitive understanding of working with extreme conditions, of building things that didn't just survive in harsh environments but thrived because of them. You try to control everything, Denna observed one evening as they reviewed progress. Make it stable, predictable. We accept chaos and work with it. David thought about that while watching dragons reinforce the heat exchangers. They didn't build straight lines. Everything had curves and spirals that seemed random, but actually distributed thermal stress more effectively than human designs. Maybe I've been thinking about this wrong, David said slowly. I've been trying to make the crystals stable, gentle, like Earth's snow. But this isn't Earth. Obviously, Dennis said, sounding amused. No, I mean, dragons don't want gentle. You fly through volcanic updrafts for fun. You swim in lava pools. Why am I trying to create something calm? David pulled up his design files and started making changes. Instead of trying to dampen turbulence, he would embrace it, use the natural convection currents that dragons navigated effortlessly, make the crystals dance on thermal chaos instead of fighting it. He added microstructure to each crystal, tiny pockets of dragon scale compound that would release cooling bursts and pulses. The effect would make them swirl and spiral instead of falling straight. And if he tuned the aerosol compounds correctly, they might even catch Pyro's 7's triple sunset and refract the light into colors. Sirax found him 2 days later, still making modifications. The council is getting impatient. They want to know when we will test. Soon, David promised. I just need to change everything about how this works. Everything, well, not the fundamental physics, just the execution. I realized I've been trying to create Earth snow when I should be creating Pyro's 7 snow. Your snow, something wild and chaotic and beautiful. Sirax was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mother would have liked you, Engineer David. She always said the best ideas came from seeing things differently." David saved his changes and stood up, his back protesting from hours hunched over his workstation. "Then let's build something she would have loved to see." David spent 3 days just watching dragons. Not working, not calculating, just observing. He sat in his environmental suit at the edge of the volcanic plateau and studied how they moved through their world. Dragons didn't fear the heat. They played in it. Young dragons dove through thermal updrafts, spinning and tumbling in currents of air so hot they glowed. Adults navigated between volcanic vents like they were dancing, using the chaos of convection to move with impossible grace. They weren't fighting their environment. They were part of it. "You're staring again," Sirax said, landing beside David with a thump that shook the ground. "My people are starting to think you're studying us for some secret human purpose." "I am studying you," David admitted. "I've been designing this whole project like a human would experience it. Calm, controlled, safe. But that's not what you need. What do we need?" David gestured to a group of young dragons racing through a twisting column of superheated air, their scales flashing in the sunlight. "That. Movement. Energy. Snow on Earth is gentle because Earth is gentle. But Pyro's 7 isn't gentle. Your snow shouldn't be either." He pulled up his modified designs on his tablet. "I'm completely redesigning the dispersal pattern. Instead of trying to create stable, predictable crystal paths, I'm going to use your planet's natural turbulence. The crystals will ride thermal currents, spiral through convection zones, respond to every wind and heat wave." Sirax studied the swirling patterns on the screen. "It looks chaotic. It looks alive," David corrected. "And there's more. I've been running tests on the acoustic properties of the crystals. They vibrate at specific frequencies when exposed to certain thermal patterns. If I tune them right, they'll hum. Dragons might even be able to influence their movement patterns with your bioelectric fields. You're giving us interactive snow." "I'm giving you dragon snow," David said. "It won't be anything like Earth snow, but that's the point. This is yours." The redesign took another week of frantic work. David incorporated piezoelectric elements into the crystal structure, making them responsive to the electromagnetic fields dragons naturally generated. He adjusted the aerosol composition to create crystals that would cluster and separate based on thermal gradients, forming patterns that shifted constantly. The breakthrough came accidentally. David was testing a new compound mixture when he noticed the crystals were refracting light in unexpected ways. Pyro's 7 had 3 suns that set at different times, creating unique lighting conditions. His crystals were catching those multiple light sources and splitting them into cascading rainbow effects. "That's beautiful," Dennis said, watching the test crystals dance in his lab chamber. "Does it affect functionality?" "Actually, it improves it," David said, studying the readings. "The light refraction creates additional thermal variation, which extends the crystal lifetime. They're feeding off the heat from the light itself. But extending the lifetime was still his biggest challenge. Even with all his improvements, the crystals only lasted about 5 minutes before thermal equilibrium destroyed them. For a proper demonstration, he needed at least 15 to 20 minutes of continuous snowfall. David was running calculations for the 100th time when Sirax found him in the middle of the night. The Dragon Prince looked worried. "The council wants to schedule the demonstration," Sirax said. "They're bringing in elders from other worlds. My grandmother is traveling from the outer colonies. She was my mother's mother. If this fails in front of her, it won't fail, David said automatically, then stopped himself. Actually, I can't promise that. This is all untested at full scale. There could be variables I haven't accounted for. Syrax sat down, which involved carefully folding his legs beneath him. He was quiet for a long moment. Why are you doing this, David? Really? You have your job, your career. Helping me doesn't benefit you at all. If anything, failure will damage your reputation. David set down his tablet. It was a fair question. My father had Alzheimer's. Do you know what that is? A human brain disease. He forgot everything. His whole life just disappeared piece by piece. But there was one thing he never forgot. He used to tell me, even at the end when he couldn't remember my name, that I should never quit on someone's dream. He said dreams are the only things that matter when everything else is gone. Your father sounds wise. He was. And he had dreams for me. Wanted me to be an engineer to build impossible things. He died before he could see me graduate. David looked at the apparatus taking shape outside his window. I'm not doing this just for you, Syrax. I'm doing it because your mother had a dream and you're trying to honor it. That matters. That's worth fighting for. Syrax's golden eyes reflected the glow from David's screens. She would have liked you. She would have liked her son for not giving up. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Syrax said something that changed everything. My mother loved storms, not gentle weather. She used to fly into the worst thermal tempests she could find, so they made her feel alive. David sat up straight. Wait, say that again. She loved storms. I've been trying to create something beautiful and calm, because that's how humans think of snow. But your mother didn't want calm. She wanted wonder, excitement, something as powerful as she was. David's mind raced through implications. He didn't need to fight the chaos. He needed to amplify it, make it bigger, wilder, more intense. Instead of smooth crystal clouds, he could create swirling vortexes. Instead of gentle drift, he could make them surge and spiral on magnetic field lines. I need to modify the field generators, David said, already pulling up schematics, and recalibrate the dispersal rhythm. If I pulse the aerosol release instead of making it continuous, I can create waves of crystals that build and crash like thermal storms. Will that work? I have no idea, but it's what your mother would have wanted to see. David worked through the night, making changes that would have horrified his engineering professors. He was deliberately introducing instability into the system, creating feedback loops that would make the crystals respond dynamically to every thermal current. By morning, he had a new design that terrified and excited him in equal measure. It was bold, risky, and completely insane. It was perfect. Schedule the demonstration, David told Syrax. I'm ready. Are you sure? David looked at the modified plans glowing on his screen. No, but I'm done trying to be sure. Time to see if impossible can become real. 6 hours before the demonstration, David found the problem. A critical calculation error buried deep in the energy distribution equations. The feedback loop he had deliberately created would work. It would work too well. The system would pull more and more energy from the volcanic channels until it created a runaway cascade that could superheat the entire capital city. No, David muttered, running the numbers again. The result didn't change. He had designed something that would start beautiful and end catastrophic. There was no time to postpone. Dragons had been gathering on the ceremonial plateau since dawn. Thousands of them, filling the ancient stone amphitheater that surrounded the demonstration site. Word had spread across multiple worlds. Syrax's grandmother had arrived from the outer colonies, an ancient dragon whose deep purple scales were nearly black with age that David's hand shook as he pulled up the system schematics. He could abort, shut it down before activation. But that would mean admitting failure in front of everyone who had believed in him. In front of Syrax, who had traveled to 17 different species, hoping for a miracle. Think, David told himself. There has to be a solution. Plasma venting. If he could add pressure release valves to the system, bleeding off excess energy as controlled plasma bursts, he might be able to prevent the cascade. It would be risky. The venting would create superheated jets shooting into the sky. But it would be better than melting the city. David grabbed his comm device and contacted Dina. I need emergency modifications to the heat exchanger system. Can you get your team to the plateau immediately? Now? David, the demonstration starts in 6 hours. I know. I found a problem. A big one. I can fix it, but I need help and I need it fast. Dina didn't ask questions. We'll be there in 10 minutes. The next 5 hours were pure chaos. Dragon engineers worked at speeds that terrified the human safety inspectors, welding plasma vent ports into the heat exchanger network while David recalculated flow rates on the fly. Every modification affected 10 other systems. Every fix created 2 new variables to account for. This is insane, one of the human engineers said, watching a dragon metallurgist shape white-hot metal with her bare claws. We should postpone. Can't, David said, entering commands into the control system. Too many people already here. Too much expectation. We either do this now or we don't do it at all. Syrax appeared beside him, moving quietly despite his size. David, tell me honestly, will this work? David looked up from his tablet. The plateau was packed with dragons now. Thousands of golden eyes watching the apparatus with mixture of hope and skepticism. Syrax's grandmother sat on a raised platform, ancient and dignified, waiting to see if the human could deliver on his promise. I don't know, David admitted. I designed something beautiful but dangerous. I found the danger too late. Now I'm fixing it too fast. By every engineering standard, this is a disaster waiting to happen. Should we cancel? David looked at the massive thermal gradient generator, at the aerosol tanks filled with dragon-scale compounds, at the magnetic field arrays humming with barely contained power. Months of work, hundreds of people helping, all for a promise to a dying dragon who wanted her son to see something beautiful. No, David said. We run it. If it fails, it fails. But we try. The last modifications finished with 30 minutes to spare. David ran system checks while dragons filled every available space on the plateau. The 3 suns were beginning their staggered descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that no Earth sunset could match. Elder Carava rose from her seat, her black scales gleaming. We gather to witness an attempt at the impossible. Prince Syrax has told us of Engineer David's efforts to honor Queen Serana's final wish. We shall see if human ingenuity can overcome the laws of nature itself. David stood at the control console, Syrax beside him. They looked at each other, and David saw his own nervousness reflected in the dragon prince's golden eyes. Ready? David asked. No, Syrax said honestly. You, not even a little bit. David's finger hovered over the activation command. But let's do it anyway. He pressed the button. Deep beneath the plateau, massive valves opened. Magma surged through carved channels, feeding the heat exchangers with energy drawn from the planet's molten heart. The ground trembled. Dragons shifted uneasily, feeling the vibration through their claws. The aerosol dispersal system engaged next. Massive tanks released their carefully mixed compounds, and nozzles sprayed them high into the superheated air. The mist caught the light, creating a shimmering haze above the plateau. Then the magnetic field generators activated. The air itself seemed to bend. Invisible forces grabbed the aerosol particles and held them suspended, organizing them into patterns dictated by field lines and thermal currents. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then the first crystal formed that appeared as a tiny point of light, refracting the triple sunset into rainbow colors. Then another crystal formed, and another. They grew from microscopic to visible, their branching structures catching and splitting light in cascading waves of color. The crystals began to move. They didn't fall. They danced. They swirled through the thermal currents that rose from the volcanic plateau, riding updrafts and downdrafts with the same wild grace the young dragons showed in flight. Some clustered together in spiraling vortexes. Others spread out in glittering sheets that rippled like waves. The magnetic fields pulsed, and the crystals responded. They surged and retreated, building into towers of light that collapsed and reformed. The plasma vents engaged, shooting columns of superheated gas into the sky. Instead of looking dangerous, They created pillars around which the crystals spiraled like living things. Dragons around the plateau gasped. Some roared in amazement. The crystals were reacting to their bioelectric fields, swirling around individuals who called to them, creating personal storms of light and color. Syrax stood transfixed, watching crystals dance through the air in front of him. He raised one claw, and they spiraled around it, responding to his presence. His voice came out as a whisper. "It's beautiful." David checked his readings. Energy levels were climbing, but staying within safe parameters. The plasma vents were managing the excess heat perfectly. The system was working. It was actually working. An older dragon near the front began to sing, a deep, resonant sound that carried across the plateau. Other dragons joined in, traditional harmonies that David had heard during ceremonies. The crystals responded to their voices, pulsing and swirling in rhythm with the music. Syrax's grandmother rose from her seat and spread her wings. She was ancient, nearly too old to fly, but she launched herself into the air anyway. She flew through the crystal storm, and they parted around her like water, creating a wake of light that trailed behind her wings. David realized he was crying. The environmental suits, environmental controls, couldn't quite handle the tears that kept fogging his faceplate. "You did it," Syrax said, his voice full of wonder. "You actually did it." "We did it," David corrected. "This used your scales, your metallurgy, your understanding of heat and chaos. I just put the pieces together." The demonstration reached its peak. Thousands of crystals filled the air, creating a storm of light that transformed the volcanic plateau into something from a dream. Dragons flew through it, sang to it, danced with it. It was chaos and beauty combined, wild and magnificent. Then the ground shook. Not the gentle rumble from the heat exchangers. This was different. Wrong. David's control panel lit up with warnings. Seismic activity was spiking across the region. The volcanic channels they had tapped were responding to the energy drain. Pressure was building in chambers that had been stable for centuries. "We need to shut down," David said, reaching for the emergency controls. "Now!" David's fingers flew across the control panel, initiating emergency shutdown procedures. The crystals were still dancing overhead, beautiful and oblivious to the danger building beneath the plateau. Around him, dragons continued to sing and fly through the light show, unaware that the ground was about to betray them. "What's happening?" Syrax demanded, reading the fear on David's face. "We pulled too much energy too fast. The volcanic systems are destabilizing." David pulled up seismic readings. 3 major pressure points showed critical levels. "If we don't manage this carefully, we're going to trigger eruptions." Syrax immediately understood. He roared, a sound that cut through the music and silenced thousands of dragons. "Everyone back. Clear the plateau." Denna appeared at David's side, her green scales reflecting the warning lights from his console. "What do you need? Help me manage the shutdown. We can't just cut power instantly, or we'll cause thermal shock. We need to bleed it off gradually while managing the seismic feedback." They worked together, dragon and human, operating systems neither could have built alone. David handled the atmospheric controls while Denna managed the heat exchanger valves. Syrax coordinated evacuation efforts, his voice calm despite the crisis. The crystals began to fade as power levels dropped. Dragons who had been flying through the light show landed and retreated to safe distances. The singing stopped. Everyone watched in tense silence as the engineers fought to prevent disaster. "Pressure spike in Sector 4, Denna called out. "Routing it to plasma vents," David responded. A column of superheated gas shot into the sky, longer and fiercer than before. "Come on, hold together." The seismic sensors showed the volcanic chambers slowly stabilizing. The energy drain was decreasing. The pressure was evening out. David watched the numbers climb down from critical levels, hardly daring to breathe. Finally, after 20 minutes that felt like hours, the last heat exchanger valve closed. The system was offline. The crystals had completely disappeared. The plateau fell silent, except for the crackling of cooling metal and the distant rumble of volcanic activity returning to normal. David slumped against his console. They had done it. The demonstration had succeeded, and the shutdown had prevented catastrophe. Barely did Syrax's grandmother approach the control station. She was so old that walking seemed difficult, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Engineer David," she said, her voice carrying authority that made everyone listen. "You have done something I did not believe possible. Thank you, Elder, but I am not finished." She looked at the now empty sky where crystals had danced minutes before. "My daughter dreamed of snow because she saw wonder in it, beauty in something delicate existing despite impossible conditions. You understood that. You created something that honored her memory better than any recreation of Earth's snow could have." She turned to address the assembled dragons. Queen Serana would have been proud, not just of what was created here, but of the collaboration that made it possible. Humans and dragons working together, combining our different strengths to achieve what neither could accomplish alone. The gathered dragons roared their agreement, a sound that shook the air. David felt the vibration in his chest, even through his environmental suit. Elder Karava stepped forward. "The council has a proposal, Engineer David. Other dragon worlds have heard of this project. They want their own versions, adapted to their unique conditions." "I can help with that," David started to say, but Karava raised a claw. "We do not want you to build them for us. We want you to teach dragon engineers the principles so we can create our own designs. Different worlds will need different solutions. We should learn to solve these problems ourselves with your guidance." David looked at Syrax, who nodded encouragingly. "I think that's brilliant. Human atmospheric engineering combined with dragon metallurgy and thermal management. We could establish a joint training program. More than that," Syrax said, "a research institute. Here on Pyros 7, humans and dragons working together permanently, developing solutions to problems neither species has solved alone." The idea caught fire immediately. Within hours, dragons were already discussing applications beyond artificial snow. Atmospheric terraforming technique, extreme environment construction methods, energy systems that used heat instead of fighting it. Representatives from other species arrived over the next few days, curious about what had happened. The story spread. A human engineer had achieved the impossible by working with dragons instead of for them. By respecting their nature instead of trying to change it, trade agreements formed. Research partnerships, cultural exchanges. The Galactic Terraforming Consortium offered David a promotion, but he turned it down. "I'm staying here," he told his supervisor. "There's too much interesting work to do." 3 months later, the permanent crystal generator was completed. It was built into the ceremonial plateau as a memorial to Queen Serana. Once a year, on the anniversary of her death, the dragons would activate it and create their snowstorm. They called it the Day of Dancing Snow. David stood with Syrax watching the first annual ceremony. The crystals swirled through the air just as beautifully as they had during the original demonstration. But this time, there were no emergencies, no near disasters. Just dragons celebrating and remembering. "My mother would have loved this," Syrax said quietly. "Not just the snow, but everything it led to. Dragons and humans learning from each other, creating things neither of us imagined. Your mother sounds like she was ahead of her time." She was. She always believed that different kinds of minds working together could solve impossible problems. Syrax watched a group of young dragons playing in the crystal storm, their joyful roars echoing across the plateau. "I used to think she was being idealistic. Now I know she was just right." David's comm device buzzed. A message from Dinah about the new engineering students arriving tomorrow. 6 humans, 8 dragons, all eager to learn from each other. The Joint Institute was growing faster than anyone had expected. "I need to go," David said. "Class prep for tomorrow. Teaching now, Engineer David. Someone has to show the next generation that impossible just means nobody's figured it out yet." David walked back toward the Institute buildings, leaving Syrax to enjoy the ceremony. Above him, crystals danced on thermal currents, splitting triple sunset into rainbows. Around him, Dragons and humans worked side by side, speaking different languages but understanding each other perfectly. IT wasn't the snow that mattered, David realized. It never had been. It was the belief that something impossible could become real if you approached it from a new direction. If you combined different perspectives and refused to accept the word can't. Queen Serena had been right. Humans did see problems differently, but so did dragons. So did every species in the galaxy. And when those different viewpoints came together, when they built on each other's strengths instead of competing, that's when real magic happened. Not magical magic. Engineering magic. The kind that turned dreams into reality and impossible into inevitable. David smiled and headed inside to prepare for tomorrow's lesson. He had a lot to teach and even more to learn. The future was going to be interesting.